So you can hang this off of your belt. I was wondering what was up with this one guy that was being really hush-hush to me, and he sent me these prototype speakers, and it was just really bizarre, and I didn't know why he was being so hush-hush to me, but I'm actually suspecting the reason why he sent them to me was because he just wanted me to know that there's really no difference between these and the $300,000 speakers. Because when I opened them up, I saw the crossover, and it was just like the same shit. And it seems like the only thing that holds back Americans from like making things is fear of being sued. Whereas like there's actually like a boom in like even Vietnam and China and stuff, and just where they just sell things, they just name things like SMSL or like Duke or something. So these are significant because they're basically they're the blade, the $300,000 speakers, minus the big ass case with the 4 woofers on the side. But that's just what these are. So it's not really anything different. So all I gotta do is pretty much make it sound as good as this, but make it so that you can carry it around. So I would just need a faceplate around this thing. That would have to be a waveguide. And then a battery box on the back. And it would be a product that would be ready to sell. And then I would just have to like sell it out of Vietnam. Or sell it out of like a country that isn't litigious. But what's funny is that this actually bypasses everything that KEF has been doing. So KEF have been trying to make their speakers so that, it's like a speaker within a speaker. But you don't really have to do that anymore. Because low range sound is vibration. You could just go straight from vibration and then meet it in the middle. So this is a speaker that plays up as high as you would pretty much want it. I can get one that's better. It goes up to 18K. It goes down to about 120. And then the vibration on the back is what's leading it to sound full range bass. So then that ends up making the same type of sound, essentially, as what this does. But it's smaller, and you can carry it around with you. All I gotta do is, because I already know how to do the waveguide, basically just dig in deeper and then add a ring on the outside. And on the back, all I gotta do is add the battery. Or I could slip the battery on the inside. Or just make the case. I want to make it small. I want to make it so that, you could kind of just pretty much make it like the smallest little, like, really, really bass heavy JBL boom. Because the JBL booms are really big. So I want to make it like a JBL boom. Yeah, but all that bass right there is just coming from just this little guy right here. It's just the same concept. And the only reason why I've been afraid of selling it is because I don't want to be sued. And I just think it's bullshit that, like, you just have to like be so afraid of being sued in America just for wanting to sell anything. So like I wanna like I'm thinking about just basically doing something where I just basically sell it out of a partner in China. So I know this one guy who knows how to manufacture stuff in China, and then I could just work with him and then just either sell it out of China or sell it out of Vietnam. And with audio, everything's like very it's like, you know, very geometric. So like as much as people could try to copy it and stuff, you could actually you could always optimize yours better. And if you could get your name out first and you could get your form factor out first. So this is like the concept is a hockey puck. And you could just, you know, fit in your pocket, or you can hang it off of your keychain. But what's cool is, listen, the whole entire thing rumbles. And so whereas back in the day, you wouldn't want speakers to rumble, I think we've actually reached an age where we don't actually care anymore. we could have your speakers rumble. So I even sell add-on parts if I wanted to, where I could like have it so I mount this into a thing, so then it would transfer the rumble, so that way it wouldn't, you know, rumble anymore, and it would be like more like a floor standard speaker. But on its own, it's already doing what this is doing. It's a center point speaker. It's playing its audio from the center, time of line with the bass, which is coming from all around it. And Kef's pan just ran out. And that's why they went from this design to this design. So what Kef used to do was, in America, we also have this stupid freaking like Phoebus cartel, where we test all our speakers like they're mono speakers. So we test them like from the front for some reason, even though no one listens to the speakers like, you know, with their speakers actually aimed at them anymore. That's like so passe. You like with these speakers, for instance, you're supposed to listen to them from an angle. And when I have them placed in the room, I always have them placed, you know, so they're like way off at an angle. So I listen to them from this flare. What's interesting is that this outer flare here only exists because they have to play the measurement game. This outer flare here doesn't actually do anything. It only exists if you are listening to the speaker on the, you know, from the front. So if you're at Best Buy or something like that, and you're listening to the speaker, then yeah, it's gonna use the outer flare. But if you're actually listening to the speaker like properly, you're gonna listen to it like here. And what's funny is effectively, the speaker then only becomes this small. This outer region here is actually a third wave region. No point of this angle here actually reaches you. There's no odds. Like the odds of this actual angle here actually reaching you is like 0. And even if it did, it would actually cause problems because of this flare. So the speaker is actually only this big. That's how big the flare is. The flare is the woofer, and the woofer controls the guidance for the tweeter, right? So watch. See how there's an outer rim? If I zoom in, that's what the entirety of the speaker really is. And you could tell you could tell the way they do it by watch. No one tests center speakers. No one cares. So they actually didn't care to add the outer flare on the center speaker. They just made it so the whole entire thing is a flare. So they use the whole entire surface of the cone the way you're supposed to. The way that their design would actually want it to be. So the only reason why I have that giant 1-inch outer flare thing is because of when going to, Best Buy or whatever like that, and then people listen to the speaker from the front, and that would make them think that you should, buy that speaker over the other speaker. Whereas at home, and with this speaker, it makes sense. You would listen to it from the front. But at home, where you're listening to this speaker, you never listen to it when it's aimed directly at you. That's actually a no-no. You're supposed to always aim these either straight. If you look at pictures, look up like KEF demos, everyone aims them straight or just slightly inward a little bit. That's why they made these speakers are rad. It's one curved piece of wood, but that's why they made it angled like that, is because you could angle it in so you clear side walls. But effectively, this ring right here is all the speaker is. This outer ring only exists for measurements, so it could pass Hi-Fi magazine ratings, which is stupid. And check this out. See, so this is the only part of the speaker that actually really matters. Check out what they did with the next generation. Right as soon as their patent expired. Ta-da! See? No more outer flare. It's all just, no more outer flattened rim. It's all just the flare. Because the flare is the only part that actually matters. The flare is the part that allows it for the tweeter is able to reflect at an angle so that at any given point the flare is pointed somewhere directly at you, so that the tweeter and the flare from the woofer converge their sounds, and it's called single point. It's called a single point coincident driver, so that the tweeter and the woofer both sound like they come from the same source. So to fool people, they actually added this rim on the outside that's flat. It's like this Nerf rim. So when you're up close to it, you can actually hear the same effect as the other things, where it'll actually sound fine when you're up close, because the tweeter, because of this tangerine waveguide, that's what they called it. They actually patented this thing. I don't know how, because this is the same thing you actually see on DJ horns all the time. But anyway, this thing allows it so that it spreads the air and hits this thing, right? So when you're from the front, you actually hear the sound like, it sounds like a normal speaker. But still, once you take it home, you listen to it at normal distances, and this outer ring would never ever reach your ears. It's Nerf. It's too silent to reach your ears. It doesn't matter. It only matters for people who are doing tests, which usually use a microphone this close, where they measure on axis, and they measure here, and they measure here, and then that sums this and this, and then they go, wow, look how smooth the line is. But that doesn't matter, because in real use, no one listens to them on axis. They listen to them like this and like this. That's why I have both my speakers just pointed straight. It's because that's how you're supposed to listen to them. So as soon as their patent ran out, they actually just stopped caring, and they actually just got their surround to fool everyone into doing what that long flat rim used to do, which is pretty hilarious. So now they just don't give a fuck. So they just started working more on electronics now. So their speakers from this point on have been working a lot more on electronics. Meanwhile, their super high-end speakers, they actually don't sell anything that actually uses baffle elements outside of the actual speaker anymore. This is the highest end speaker design they have, and this is the one I actually got for free from this one dude. According to traditional speaker design, you're not supposed to actually use the baffle. You're supposed to have the whole entire thing out of the way, so that you only hear sound from the driver, and the baffle is like non-existent, almost like sound is radiating directly from the air. But that's only true for mono speakers, because back in the day when people started doing this test, it was actually mostly Harman. And I'm actually I think maybe it was because Samsung bought out Harman that like people just stopped really caring about that kind of stuff. But when they listen to mono speakers, they gather around their mono speakers like they're gathering around their TV. So yeah, you'd want your mono speaker to have as little frame as possible, and you want it to have as wide of a dispersion as possible, blah blah. But once they went into stereo, two mono speakers does not actually make a good stereo sound at all. It actually makes a horrible stereo pair. And that's actually why the BBC commissioned a whole freaking 7-year project to create the LS35As, which is what these are based off of. And that was just to figure out how to turn two mono speakers into a stereo pair. So once they figured out how to do that, they came out with the LS35As, and that became the first standardized studio monitor. And then these are actually the LS50s, which are a revivification of the LS35As. So they're still built like the old-fashioned style, which is pretty cool because they sound really good for old-fashioned music, like anything from like the aughts and prior. It sounds really good. But these right here, I'll show you, sound holographic as fuck. And the reason why is because all the rules that they have for what makes a good mono speaker mono is completely not true. The way you really want to design a mono speaker, and this is kind of funny because Kev can't patent this, so me studying it is just fine, and I reviewed lawyers and I talked to them, and me taking it apart and studying it is fine. As long as I don't work for them, I'm not reverse engineering, I'm not a corporate spy, I can do whatever I want. So they have their baffle completely in the way on purpose, and you notice that there's actually more of a horn here than there is a horn here. And the way you imagine that is if you lay this thing on its back and fill it up with water. Notice how this thing has a curve, is an arc like this. It would actually fill up with water all the way up. So if I were to throw a rock as hard as I could right in the center, what would happen is that water would actually fly with much more velocity this way and this way than up and down where it's mirror. And the reason why they did that was because these speakers are meant to be aimed straight, like I mentioned before. They're meant not to be mono speakers, which, according to old school, you point directly at your head. They're actually designed to be future forward. So when they design these things, they design them so that you point them forward. You don't. They're supposed to be just, set and forget them. You just aim them forward, and then you're fine. And then anywhere you're sitting between, no matter what, you're always going to be hearing the speakers from the tweeter bouncing off of the flare of the woofer, and then the woofer will bounce the woofer sounds and the tweeter sounds at you. And also, once it is extended beyond the driver, it uses the outer baffle mask as a waveguide to further expand the soundstage sideways while reducing soundstage upward, because you don't want ceiling and floor reflections. That destroys holography. Our ears are left and right? So pretty much these speakers are the perfect form factors for speakers as far as stereo. This is a perfect form factor for a speaker as far as mono. So when I got this pair and I opened them up and I looked at the crossover, I was like, holy fuck, what the fuck is this thing? So it turns out it's actually the same crossover as the Blade. So it's actually like, it has all these like custom components inside that I can't even look up, which is interesting. But it doesn't really matter, because what really matters is actually how the thing's designed. And it's designed like a clock. As long as the sound disperses outward first before it emanates forward, you're good. So these things right here, aiming forward, they cast kind of like an ellipse. Imagine the shape of this thing, but turned sideways. They cast an ellipse Venn diagram. So that way when I'm sitting in the middle, the dispersion, even though they're facing forward, will still cross over here and cross over here. So it'll sound even when I'm in the middle. I don't have to toe them toward me. So that's what's pretty rad about these speakers, is that no matter where you are, no matter where you're sitting, they end up always having it so that a point of the flare is pointing at me. So just studying these speakers right here, this is end stage. And what's hilarious is that every single generation that they go forward designing their new drivers is more and more like this driver. So when I first figured out that these things were prototypes, that was probably like 6 years ago. I was like, it was pretty funny because I didn't really think that it was that big of a deal, and a whole bunch of other people kept just saying like, oh, they're just eggs. But like every generation so far has been copying this design over and over and over again. They even just recently added like the gasket on the inside. They even just recently used the injection molding style 3D printed what's it called, basket on the inside versus using a metal basket, because then actually plastic is better dampened than steel. And also when you screw in something that's plastic like poly, it actually is much easier, more forgiving than screwing it into wood. So it's just, you want your driver to actually be softer and lower, better dampened than the actual cabinet. So this driver right here is actually more futuristic than even probably the next generation. So I took the whole entire thing apart just because I was curious. And it was such like a freaking crazy secret thing that they did, that they actually made. I remember thinking about how like to best secretly engineer something so that no one else could ever figure out how to do it. So I bought this thing and I took it apart. There was a stack of magnets in there. Let me see if I can find one of them. But usually magnets have, I'll show you a typical magnetic coil. So this is a typical magnetic coil. Right. I didn't say anything. Presuming probably 30 watts. That disc in the middle, this thing actually doesn't have an external magnet. Look how small the thing on the back is. That thing right there, this thing right there, is the voice coil. The voice coil is pretty much as big as the entire freaking motor, which tells you this thing is not the motor. So inside of this thing, and there's still actually more, I could actually remove more of these things, there's actually a whole bunch of these little discs. Let me see if I can find one right now. But what's really clever about it is the tweeter that was attached to it wasn't actually attached to it by anything. This is what it looks like. And when I opened it, I was like, how the hell did they put this thing together? Because when I opened this thing up, I removed this rim, I unscrew it, I take it apart, there's actually a screw in the back, I unscrew that, and then I pull this thing out. When I take this thing apart, it looks like this in the back. How do you take this thing apart? Right? So what you do, what I did out of desperation, is I just grabbed the freaking tweeter, this part right here, and I just literally yanked it. I just kept pulling on it I grabbed this, I kept pulling at it, I grabbed that, I kept pulling at it, and it just kept yanking it and grinding it, and then eventually it just popped out. Because all it was connected with neodymium magnets. This thing was just connected to a whole stack, a whole array of neodymium magnets. And I don't even know if they're neodymium. They're magnets about this big, and they're all different magnets, different compositions. But what's crazy is that when I pulled it out, this entire thing, I'll show you what the actual, look how much space this thing is. So this is actually, this is also very crazy. Look how hard it was for me to actually saw through this thing. This thing you would think is ABS, right? But it's not. It's actually a form of ABS that has self-defense mechanisms. If you use a power saw, it literally melts into a gunk that will then eat your saw. So you'll have to use a tool to try to clean your saw. The only way that you can actually like grind through this thing is I just aim for the vents. There's these vents right here, and I have to use a jeweler's saw. And I just kind of like just slowly through like a whole series of Stranger Things, just line it up, and I just kept going, taking hours and hours and hours and hours, till eventually I got through. And then once I reversed the story. The funny part was the fact that when I pulled this thing out, it was actually attached to a layer of magnets up this high, right? And look how much space is in there. Look how much, okay, on top also, see all those little holes? Those are gaps, because this thing is actually so freaking over-engineered that it could actually power, this thing's rated 100 watts. Let me show you something else that's rated 100 watts. That's rated 100 watts. Okay, yeah. So I've been working on taking this thing apart for freaking like 3 days, because it's pretty much like alien technology. What's funny was that I sent it to the guy from that runs Rocky Mountain Speaker Festival, and he opened them up and he was like, "Dude, this thing is like alien technology." And I didn't even realize that there was anything special about it at first. I just thought that they performed very great. Like the sound was just really good. As far as I can tell, they sounded like these. And these are very high end. These are $2,000 speakers. So these are actually the special limited black edition. So they have matching serials in the back. And speakers are known to vary a lot. So when you're paying like $300,000, what you're really paying for is quality assurance. These have very, very high quality assurance because they're the last 1,000 made. So they actually do match very well. These also match freaking better than these do. These are freaking laboratory matched. It's ridiculous. But anyway, see that little, almost like a fake diaphragm? It's not, it is really the diaphragm, right? This little ring right there. So that's the tweeter, and that's the diaphragm. And it's actually a 3-dimensional diaphragm, which is what the 12th generation KEF UniQ driver design just came out with this year. They just added this thing, which is a sealed suspension between this gap. Because back in the past, there used to be a gap in between here. And that gap, I'll just describe it to you. Basically, they crippled it. Or, I mean, I could be a nice guy and I could say it's anticipatory design, marketing terms. They made it so that if you played this thing up to, even though it's rated for 100 watts, if you played it up to 100 watts, air would actually leak from this whole entire gap right there. And the problem with that is that, like I was saying before, this is almost like a fractal. The waveguide, the radiator right there, makes sure that the dome shoots out air sideways before it shoots it out forward. See how it kind of blocks it? So when it shoots out sideways, it actually anticipates this flare. This flare is then what causes the sound to reflect to you. The issue is, when you played it too loud, air would actually literally congest and sneeze, meaning air would actually depress, like as in negative air pressure into the hole, and expand, meaning like you'll chuff out of the hole. And what that would do is it's almost like if I were to take a clock and I just speed up the second hand and I just slow the second hand. What would happen is that you would hear just suddenly a coagulation of sound and then suddenly a rasp. And then a coagulation and a rasp. And that would only happen if you're playing this thing really loud during busy sequences. So they released the second generation of these, which they don't even call the second generation. They wiped out the name completely. They just call them the Metas now. And they sealed the gap. And all their speakers now actually have that gap sealed. So that design there was already something that they knew about that was a flaw. And they already had the solution here, as you could see right here, because it's actually not a hard solution. Literally all it is a surround inside. The same way you have a surround on the outside, they just added a surround on the inside. This thing already has that. But see how this horn thing, that little horn shape, that ended up actually becoming integrated into the shape of this diaphragm, right? And it's really cool because it allows it for continuity. So this thing is also like pretty rad because it has the flattest dome out of all the caps. It has the same type of arc as the blade, which means that it shoots the biggest spheres of sound, which is pretty rad. So anyway, that's why it's so receded. Like, see how receded this is versus this, which is more like, you know, flat. But anyway, this thing is, and also besides that, on the other side, because of those flares, see how it's black on the outer rim right there? The actual, I tore this thing apart just because I wanted to study it. There's actually breathable material on the outside. So this thing is actually vented all the way through from the front. Like the waveguide pinches it in the center there, but air is actually allowed. Any air that does go into there from the side, instead of actually becoming a problem, it actually just goes into the tweeter and actually just cools down the tweeter and feeds the tweeter and gives it more air. And plus, like, the tweeter itself is so small that even when it's in there, it has so much freaking space that it could just like play so freaking loud. And that's what the Rocky Mountain guy at first like was so like surprised by, was that he was just like, how the freak does this thing play up to 100 watts? And how the hell does this tweeter play so freaking loud at all? And the reason how is that this thing doesn't have a voice coil. This is actually a Kapton. Kapton is actually a thing they use in space. It's used because it actually has a burning temperature of 387 Fahrenheit. So they actually use it on satellites and stuff like that. So they actually encased see the copper there? They encased it in Kapton, so that it'd be impossible for this thing to actually burn out. So I actually tested it out to 200 watts, and it actually just keeps playing. Like, it doesn't even like sweat. It's hilarious. But what was funny was that when I did remove the tweeter, all those little disc magnets literally Pandora boxed on me. They went clop, clop. Like, they literally did this magic shuffle where they all flang out and then flang back in. And the way they do that is like this. Oh cool, I actually found one of them. So you can see how much I like rubbed against it trying to get it out. Oh, this is actually the top one. That's pretty cool. Yeah. So this thing right here was actually only connected because these wafers were so strong and stacked into there that I actually just, and you know what's, watch. See how it's repulsive? See how like it won't let me go in? Even though obviously the tweeter at some point was in there. So they actually guarded their secret so much that clearly this tweeter was right in this gap right here, right? But look, now it won't go in. See? It's actually pushing me out. And the reason why it does that is that they actually literally created a Pandora's box trap. The way you do that is, see how these magnets right here have, you know, a north side and a south side, right? Like I could connect it normally on this side, or I connect it on the other side, right? But if I were to take it the other way, and I were to, let's say, hold it down with like my foot. Sorry for my long toenail. Yeah. So actually, that's the right way. Yeah. So see, this is actually resistance, right? There's like a lot of resistance, so it's creating like a dome of resistance around it, right? But watch, if I keep pushing, it sticks. As soon as I pull it out just a little bit, it pops off. So that's what they did. All the different discs in there, all magnets, you know, have a positive and negative polarity. And so right now, this is positive against positive. So normally you're supposed to just connect it, you know, negative to positive, right? But they connected it so that it was positive to positive. And look how much force this is for just one wafer. There's only one wafer. Look how thin this thing is. And you have to remind, this is only one wafer, and I had like freaking to deal with like 6 of them. So you push it down towards the center and it locks. And that's actually how it fit in there. So once I pulled out the tweeter, the whole entire thing, see how it just shot off? The whole entire array of these discs all just shuffled, like magically flew out of this little gaping hole, like the movie freaking what's that one with the puzzle box? Yeah, so all these flew out and then they just slammed right back in, north to south, north to south, north to south. So I have no idea how the hell to put this thing back together. Which is pretty funny. But it doesn't matter, I'll just end up doing it anyway. But this driver right here, see, this is actually another loose magnet right there. So that Kapton coil there also allows them to use it as an active magnet. They could actually charge this thing and actually make this thing so that it would actually be more or less powerful against the amount of magnets in there. Not only that, but I'm actually starting to wonder what the hell this is. I don't even know if it's neodymium. Neodymium was invented in 1988, and this might actually be something else. They might actually work on some new exotic materials. And there might have been a stack where they had one very, very important magnet in there, and I need to find that. And I need to find out what's different about it, and I don't know, maybe bring it to CIA. But anyway, I'm just kidding. I'm not a fan of the CIA. But what's cool is that, see this thing? This waveguide? This was the gasket that made it so the air cannot exit. So this thing right here actually works perfectly. The baffle is shaped perfectly. The diaphragm is 3D printed perfectly. The basket is dampened perfectly. And in the 12th generation, they just got it, to be even more like this than it was in the 11th generation. Which is funny, because literally time is catching up to this thing. But I could take this tweeter out. See that? I could take this tweeter out and put it in here if I wanted to. But I actually wouldn't want to, because this tweeter is actually worse than this tweeter. It may not look like it, but it is. Look how shallow this horn is. And look how round. The arc of this tweeter is about the same arc as, I'd say, a ping pong ball. Whereas the arc of this right here is about the same arc as, let's say, an orange. Which means that you actually want the tweeter to be a dome only because you need it to be stiff. In a perfect universe, you'd want the tweeter dome to be flat, which is why these existed, which is why Harman Kardon bought them out and then stopped using them. But they actually have this thing right here, which is the flattest diaphragm ever made. And it's strong enough that it's the only KEF speaker that can play up to 55 kilohertz. Even their most expensive flagship right now can only play up to 48 kilohertz. This thing can only play up to 36 kilohertz. But yeah, that means that this thing plays up to 50 kilohertz is the highest we have in terms of recording right now. And it plays with 5 kilohertz headroom above that. Just like this thing right here is pretty rad because you can actually unlock it. It's actually only supposed to play up to 200, but you're gonna unlock it to play up to 350. So this thing right here plays up to 350, and this thing right here plays up to 28. That's why when I do this, these actually sound like mids. So these two together end up actually working like what the blade was intentionally meant to do. Because originally when they made the blade, you look at pictures of it, they basically had to work out a way of making it so that you would have something this thin, but have it so that there's a woofer on this side and a woofer on this side, and they would both not cause any sort of ring distortion. Like where if there's any sort of error at all in perfect equilibrium, they wouldn't cause, one wouldn't cause the other one to just crash, right? So they designed this thing as a pretty much a prototype. So they had to make it play all the way up to 350 hertz, and they did such a good job that you can actually blast this thing and you can float. Even though I have it on a freaking wobbly side of the stands I used to use for these guys, this thing's only supposed to be strong forward and backward. Left and right is actually wobbly as hell. And I could blast the bass. And it doesn't matter. Time freezes around this thing. See, look how wobbly this is. See? It's actually not supposed to be strong this way. It's only supposed to be strong this way. So when they designed this thing, what's also hilarious is that they also did a lot of backward work. This is actually the ideal shape of a single stand. You make it shaped like a sword, so that when you pick it up and you're in a studio, you could always, if it's in its footprint, you could always rotate it, right? Because it's round. And having it shaped like a sword or a sword handle means I have perfect ability to aim its axis. Not only is it very comfortable for me to pick it up, and oddly enough, the ones that he gave me actually have adjustable weights in there, which is pretty funny. The ones he sell to consumers don't. But so this thing is actually meant so that I could actually aim it. Like I could place it down wherever I want, and then I could just position it, right? I have it perfect right now, so I don't even want to do that. But if I picked it up, I could just rotate it like a sword and then put it back down. But what's cool is see how instead of having a round base, they actually added teeth in the back. Meaning, I don't care if I do this. If I push it backward, it's locked on axis. So for some reason, you look at Kef's next generations, it's like they lost all their, it's like they all had a stroke or something. Like, again, this stand right here was made for this thing, which came afterward. Why is this round? Why is this round? Round means it actually has a tone. Elliptical means it doesn't have a tone. Because it's elliptical, so that means that there's no actual like resonance. So why aren't these elliptical? Yeah. So when they started making these round again, that also meant that there was more weight. So it would have saved them money if they would have cut the back hole again, and it would have saved us effort and time, because once you set it down, you could always lock it by its back teeth. Anyway, that's about it. And also, if you wanted to rake it, I like raking these upward a little bit, just because I never want to hear them on axis. So I want to hear them like, even if I'm sitting down in a weird position, I want to hear them facing above me. So I hear them from either this flare or this flare, because it's the same thing. So all I gotta do is put one item right here, and then the two back fangs makes it into a tripod. Whereas everything else, you gotta add like, 3